Welcome to the Brick Lounge, episode 1. We're here with Brian from Westat, and let's go around and see who's on the call today and introduce our presenter. So I'm Daniel. I'm a solutions architect based out of Australia, and I'm joined by Nina and Sanford.
So my name is Nina Williams, and I am a solutions architect based out of San Diego, California. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And Sambit Shastri. I am an account executive based out of Chicago. And yeah, really looking forward to this.
Brian Sokol. I'm the VP of Data Architecture and Data Engineering at Westat.
Awesome. We're really excited for you to be here, Brian. I think just to kick it off, let's start with something easy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into data and AI, and what we know your role now at Westat, but a little bit more into what you do there?
Yeah. All right. So in terms of background, how I got into technology and things like that, I was sort of the cliche Gen X kid in the 80s, programming in BASIC on my Commodore 64. And so I was sort of been into computers since way back then, and then ended up in the technology field just from helping people and kind of went from there to the help desk. And then I took database application courses and software development courses and got into technology from that point of view. So just from getting through computers. But then I decided I really wanted to work on kind of issues that I cared about, not just on technology, use technology, but for things that were meaningful. So I found a job working for a federal project that helped collect data on homelessness. And so I kind of was helping communities understand the scope and kind of dimensions of homelessness in their communities and sending all that up to the federal government in order to get data on that problem. And then sort of from there, I've been on kind of working on the cusp of technology, nexus of technology and public policy since then. So that's been about 24 years. And so right now, my role at Westat is I oversee our Databricks implementation, which we call Weslytics. We've branded it, in which we do all sorts of data analysis on policy issues. What we do is we are a research consulting company primarily for the U.S. federal government, but we also have other nonprofits, foundations, some private companies, some state and local work. And we, on behalf of our clients like the Health and Human Services Department or the Department of Education, places like Department of Labor, they all have questions they want answered about particular issues like public health and the extent of cancer or education or children, or the children learning and what are the, what aren't they learning, or, what's the status of the job market? What kind of jobs are trending upward? How can we predict employment? All those kinds of things. So we have a large survey group that we've been running that can just run kind of massive surveys across the country, both by phone or in person or, out over the web. And then we also pull in other sorts of data, administrative data, health records, all sorts of things, data on labs for a health type of thing that we kind of pulled together in order to create a picture. And then sometimes the deliverable is a data product. Here's the data, client. And other times, the deliverable is, is analysis and a look at the, kind of the results.
Awesome. And you kind of talked about you joined Westat. You've, been in the industry for a while, and now you're building Weslytics on Databricks. What made the team kind of eventually decide to build Weslytics with kind of Databricks as the backend?
Well, I think there are two stages for that. Stage one was deciding we want one consolidated analytic platform for all the work we do, rather than having each project and various people with different, preferences of what tools that they use and making it custom for a particular project. We wanted to have a data ecosystem, is what we were calling it out of the bat, where we have kind of a standard way of delivering our data for clients. So that was kind of stage one. And that was a major company decision back in 2024. That was sort of going to be our main strategy point. I was hired then in that year, September of 2024, to lead that effort. So that's been my role. I guess the first, it's part one of the strategy. Hire a leader to help bring the strategy to fruition. And then I think the decision on Databricks itself, I would say there's like two main things. One is that we weighed in our kind of evaluation. We created a scoring card and different people weighed in on different aspects of the platform, but we weighed most heavily the feedback from the people, the developers and the programmers and the statisticians that were going to actually be the ones delivering work to the client instead of like the people administering it or the salespeople, or, it's really like which product was best for delivering our results. And then also we were kind of thinking, I think it was the flexibility of the product that we liked. So we really needed the flexibility. And we have people who are methodologists, and that's what they do. They agonize all day about, statistics. So we really went with Databricks for that flexibility that it offers to do analysis in multiple ways to come back with the right answer.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think me and you, we've talked quite a bit over the past couple months about like the interoperability and kind of just giving you the platform to let you do what you do best. I'm curious, when it comes to, obviously Westat has been entrenched, a large organization for a while. Obviously the doers on the data side, really like that flexibility of Databricks. How did that kind of coincide with, I think you guys have like 370 plus PhD level staff. You kind of marry the data side and the, PhD specializing in statistical methodologies, all those kind of things together for you. What was that kind of experience like?
I mean, it was definitely a change management process. I had to go on tour. I called it my Databricks tour before we even came up with the name Weslytics. And I had a pretty lake house in the background, and I would talk about what the lake house was and structured and unstructured, and how kind of just the very idea that you could use different languages within the same platform and string together engineering pipelines until it started to sink in that it was more than just one analytic piece of software, but it was a whole platform that you could do multiple things on, whether it's kind of traditional data engineering or data science or statistics, as well as lots of the AI things. And one of the things that was I really wanted to get across is kind of the ability to use AI within those pipelines. A lot of people are thinking of like, we do it, we ingest the data, we get it all ready, and then we use machine learning to analyze it. But the point I was really trying to get across is you actually can incorporate those things throughout the pipeline if they're all in one place, and your tool can do that.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess kind of following up on that kind of the AI and making sure it's deployable, applicable, I kind of think like one of the biggest things we're hearing nowadays is, and all over is, we like AI, we want to do AI, but let's be honest, like a lot of organizations kind of talk about using it, and they do kind of eventually struggle to get past the pilot stage. And for you guys, and I think we go into some use cases in a second, but what kind of made the difference to actually bring that AI and those pipelines into production for Westat?
We're not looking for how can we use AI in the organizations? How can we, solve a problem or make things go faster using AI? It's not the solution in search of a problem. We have real problems, in search of a solution. And that's, in a lot of cases, the solution could be AI. Like, how can we, one of the use cases, take 40,000 grant proposals and without reading them, categorize them. We used to read them. I mean, we still read them, but, in terms of figuring out how to get there, we're trying to work, we're using AI to at least organize them and label them and categorize them and summarize them and all those kinds of things that we really need. And so it was more just like, how can we do this more efficiently rather than how can we make AI help us, and thinking from that lens. It was definitely, it's the other way around.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense, right? In terms of the kind of efficiency and what you can actually apply it to rather than kind of just being exploratory. Speaking of those examples, I think there's quite a few pretty cool use cases that you guys are doing, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the OCR you're doing with cancer registries.
Yeah, so that's another key example where we put AI into the pipeline rather than just using it for analysis. Basically, what happens is every state collects data, like basically electronic health records, medical histories, notes from all the medical providers in the state on cancer. All the medical providers for cancer, and then that data ultimately needs to be structured and turned into XML files and then sent up to the federal government. And then they kind of aggregate all the data across multiple states. There's a few different companies and teams that help the states get from getting all these medical records and structuring them. So up until recently, the process has been, we go through the medical records and people who are clinicians or people that are trained by clinicians go through and try and find the particular data. And by the way, the point of this whole thing is to really understand cancer and the trends of cancer throughout the country. Which is it some particular kind of cancer getting more prevalent, which demographics are more likely to get particular types, all these kinds of things that really help us address this public health issue. But up until now, we've had people going in and saying, okay, they had this kind of cancer by reading all the just reading medical notes. And these are the prescriptions that they're taking. These are their demographics based on both the stuff that some of them are structured in the original record. Other ones are just typed out. I met with so-and-so and they were complaining of this kind of thing, including the patient's own circling of different things. So rather than kind of having people going through and like cutting and pasting into an XML integrated file, we're now using OCR and AI parse documents and, to get through and really extract that data from each from these records. And there's lots of challenges with that.
Awesome. And then Brian, you were kind of mentioning a little bit earlier that kind of your initial foray in this world was kind of you wanted to use data and use your passion for computers and technology, but also like make an impact. You first started working on studies of like homelessness and stuff. I know we talked a little bit outside of this about kind of what you guys are doing with the WIC program. Would love to hear a little bit more about that because I think, real-time and transactional data is kind of becoming the next frontier in a lot of this data stuff.
Yeah, so the WIC, first of all, is the Women and Infant and Child program that provides basically nutritional supplements and support for low-income mothers and children. And what happens is they basically the government says you can send a certain amount of money on this type of product, cereal, a certain amount of money on milk, a certain amount of money on fruit, et cetera. And they give them an EBT card, that's electronic benefits transfer, I believe. And they can use that card like a credit card to buy those particular things. And you'll see it if you go to supermarkets anywhere in America. It's like, WIC eligible. Those are the products they can buy. So we get data on what people bought with those cards when they bought them. And we're getting that basically credit card like transactional data that we can then bring all together. 2.5 billion transactions every 2 years, because we get them in 2 years cycles, that we then can analyze. And the government can then look at it and say, oh, are people buying cereal? Are they using the money to buy fruit? Or are they only using the money to buy snacks? Or where are the demographics ultimately of the people that are buying different things? Are there areas where only, people are buying certain types of products and not others? And so really being able to use that data, the transactional data, in order to really understand the program. So really being able to use that data to then make improvements in the program and get women and their babies the food that they need. So I think that's, really very meaningful type of work. And again, right now we're starting with that transactional data, and then next step will be to merge that with the demographic data so we can really do an even deeper analysis, which we get from surveys, deeper analysis of who's using the program for what types of things.
I know you guys are also kind of doing a lot more of that stuff internally as well. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about Weslytics and what exactly it means for Westat?
Sure. Basically, unlike probably most of Databricks clients, we didn't kind of get into the product for ourselves, for our own data. We got into it for our client projects and client work. But as we were using it, and we had sort of in the back of our mind, or at least I did, of like, we also could use it internally. Hey, what a great idea. So that's what we've really, we're just starting to do it. We just launched, we've started the project a few months ago, and we're starting really for the first time. It might be one of those cases of physician heal thyself. We give all this data to our clients, but we haven't had a kind of consolidated data platform for ourselves. But we're starting it now with Databricks, bringing it all together, starting with our sales, and business development data. We branded that too, as you mentioned, as Weslytics as opposed to Weslytics, which is for our clients. It's our own Lytics. So, and now we're also working on bringing in the HR data and our other kinds of data that's really important to us, which are less structured, such as past proposals and our resumes of all of our staff, because we have to use that both for bidding on projects, who do we have that can fit a particular need, as well as staffing existing projects. Everybody has to keep their resumes up to date, and then we'll be able to use it to query, this is what type of skills ultimately are the most valuable to our clients, or what types of skills do we need to hire or are leaving, or, all those kinds of questions. And of course, we need to bring in our financials as well. So I think people are starting to get that data bug, and we're starting to have a lot of the conversations that you might expect about governance of our own data and, who can see what that maybe we haven't had before.
How did the work that you've done at Weslytics, right, and the work that you've done for your customers really help you build your own internal analytics platform? Did you have a lot of those kind of like learnings or the work that you've already done to sort of accelerate what you built in-house and for you internally?
Yeah, definitely. For example, the data governance. Like we didn't have to, as we're building our own internal, system, we didn't say, oh, let's build a completely new, model of data governance that we can apply to our own to our own stuff. We already have data governance processes and, protocols in place. Every project has to have a data steward, and every process has to have a data owner and a custodian, and all of these kind of roles of who can read, who can write, which we apply to our client projects. So we didn't reinvent that. We just said, okay, let's use this process. Let's talk to the owner of the HR data who's concerned about making sure people's salaries don't get out in the world or whatever, and ask that person like the same way we would ask others to say, who has the right to grant access to that data, and how can we make sure, for example, that we're splitting up the development workspace from our production workspace, so that our developers, we've used scrambled data so that even our developers can't see the data, and which is what we would do with our client work as well.
And then I guess a good follow-up would be, we kind of talked about, you're building Analytics on Databricks for internal. Weslytics is kind of the overarching platform, again, built on Databricks for these external projects. What are you most excited about building next? I know we have a bunch of cool stuff down the pipeline, but what kind of is your favorite new project that you guys are building?
Well, I'm really excited about the NAEP project, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, but it's often called the Nation's Report Card. And I think I mentioned it, this kind of thing briefly before, but it's the standard which has been running, I think, since 1969, and Westat's had the work since 1983. And so it's really the only source of data on educational progress and, what kids are learning that can be applied over time. That has that 50 plus years of history of what people know, and also across states. Like lots of states all have their own assessments and things, but they're all different tests. So you can't really compare apples to oranges very easily. So we've had that contract for a long time, but we've been using, because it's been so long, all these processes really need a refresh. So we do lots of data quality checks that go through all the processes. And you can imagine, we actually go out, every other year, we assess 600,000 students in 12,000 schools. So just kind of tracking, hey, we have to reach out to 12,000 schools. How do we track all that? What are their contact information? Who's the last person to talk to? Which assessor? People have to go out and assess people in person, all that kind of stuff. We have to make sure all the quality is right. So we've been doing various kinds of daily quality checks, over the years. And, so right now the quality reports are in the form of Excel files. We have like 50 different Excel files, and each one has 25 different tabs, and you just kind of get one point in time. So if you want to compare, for example, how many people have been recruited, how many schools have been recruited since March, by now in May, you have to kind of go back and look, what was the numbers in March and what was the numbers in, open the March spreadsheet, open the May spreadsheet. So we are going to modernize that whole process, put it through Databricks. And in fact, one of the other partners is also a Databricks partner, one of the other contractors on that. So we're just going to do Delta sharing, pick up their data from the processes that they do, and do our data quality checks and build a dashboard for it. And the client did not only, so that's really just a process. It'll take a few months because there's a lot of quality checks and a lot of checks that our checks are working. They were very excited about it. Like, this is just the kind of thing we want to be doing on this program. So that's going to take a lot of work, but it's one of our, Westat's biggest projects. So I'm excited to kind of onboard that in terms of adoption. Again, we'll just get better data, and we can adjust the sample. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about.
Awesome. Let's say you were talking to kind of maybe someone who's kind of just starting a very similar journey to kind of modernize their data platforms, get more efficient. What would kind of be your advice to someone in a similar position to where you guys were at a couple of years ago?
Yeah. First of all, it's really just a year and a half ago. We've built all this, we started in January 2025 or February. But I would say my biggest advice, and one of the things I brought, was really just to make sure that it's not just a technology deployment. For us, at least, it was a major culture change, a major change of the way we do our work. So really we had to kind of combine the technology deployment with lots of change management, with lots of, professional development, with marketing, like, creating a brand, creating an internal communications mechanism, talking about how we're going to cost and price the system in our budget, and how, especially because we need to figure out how much people are going to be using the product 3 years from now, because we're waiting on 3 to 5 year contracts, and that's a little hard to get people's head around. Developing out pricing tools and also tools to track the cost, so each project manager can track their own things. So and of course the governance, which we've already mentioned a few times. So really, there's just multiple facets of the rollout that, if otherwise you kind of, build it and they don't come, right? We need to build the adoption of that. And that also means getting people excited, but not over promising when things take a little longer than they expect. So that's one thing, or many things.
And then what would you say, is kind of the best piece of career advice that you've ever received? Kind of being able to look back now as a VP at kind of such an institution, what would you tell people kind of starting out in whether it's statistics, whether it's something else, what advice really drove you?
Yeah. I mean, I think I alluded to this at the beginning, but really just working on something that you find meaningful and care about, because that's what gets you kind of through whatever the bureaucratic things or the technology glitches or whatever happens. The ability to say, well, look, this ultimately is helping the government better address, hunger among, women and children, or better, find jobs or help people with disabilities, live a normal life, all those kinds of things. It's really like, if at least you can boil it down to, this is something that I care about, even if it's 1 or 2 steps removed, I think that's what kind of keeps you going and keeps me at least going and passionate. So that would be my advice to others as well. Maybe it sounds a little bit too much like a graduation speech, but I still think it's true.
Having done it for so long, I mean, it seems clearly it's made an impact on yourself and, the work you're doing. So I think it makes complete sense. And I guess here's the big question I think the whole world is asking right now, but what's your one prediction for data and AI in the next 1 or 2 years?
I'm going to give you one little prediction, and one, my just kind of one sentence prediction is that things are just going to even out. Like right now, we have a whole camp of AI enthusiasts. It's going to change everything. It's going to do everything for us, and a whole camp of it's the end of the either. There's no ROI at all. There's nothing, or it's like the end of the world. I think there's a book out that's, I haven't read, but it's like, if anybody builds it, everyone will die, or something like that, about general intelligence, or we're all going to lose our jobs. And really, I think, and in the beginning, people were saying, no, this is not going to follow the same pattern of, a hype cycle or whatever, where, this is like just going to keep going up and up and, up and up and up. But I think it will even out. We're going to find the right use of AI and find the right ways of kind of making it productive and use it in those cases. So that's my, it's just going to be a very useful and important tool, but not, New Utopia or Armageddon. And I think part of that is my other kind of way of thought about it, which is that to some degree, kind of the AI governance and the AI kind of use cases and functionality are really going to start coming together more. Like right now, if you go to a conference, the session is either on AI governance or either on AI, functionality. But I think we're going to get to a point where they have to be more integrated, such that somehow using AI to facilitate the human in the loop, for example, rather than having it like, stop doing AI, let's have the human look at it and let's, go forward. Basically, the idea of using AI to help solve the problems that AI is also causing. The metaphor I've been telling people that I like to use a lot is that in order to drive a car, you need both the brakes and the accelerator. And it doesn't work very well, except in driver's ed, when you have the, one person on the accelerator, another person on another set of brakes. It's got to be the same person, and this, kind of built into the whole process. So I think that kind of integration, I'm not sure exactly what form it's going to take, but is where we'll be headed in the next few years.
So, well, Brian, thank you so much for being our first guest here on the Brick Lounge for episode number 1.
Thank you so much for joining us on this. And, I wish Westat the best and yourself the best of luck in the humanitarian mission moving forward.